Hello YouTubers, as promised, this is another reloading video. This one is about wads. Now I've got a few wads right here. I've got fiber wads and your plastic shot cups and your gas seals. And this is a wad insert, which I will go over. And this is an overshot wad. There's also a what do they call that? Well, there's one that's thin, like the overshot wad, except it's called a nitro card or something like that. It goes over the gunpowder. Although usually it doesn't call for it, but sometimes certain loads require it. Anyway, back in the days when we used to shoot lead, before the plastic shot cups, we used these little fiber wads. And these were, nowadays they would call them leaky loads because they don't seal quite as good as the shot cups. But they served their purpose at the time. We used a faster burning powder with lead, and we killed plenty of birds with it. And then the plastic shot cups came out. Remington called them the power piston. And they look kind of like this, except this is a steel shot, but you could use it with lead or just about anything. Of course, as far as the basics go, you have shotgun shell, brass, and then the rest. You have to excuse the crudity of this. It's not exactly straight. But this is a high brass, what they call a high brass shotgun shell. And inside, it'll look kind of like this. You got the bottom here, that's called the base wad. Primer goes in the middle, like so. And it is either made out of plastic or fiber, compressed paper. The Federal hulls for 10 gauge, for instance, they used fiber in theirs. But the Winchesters and the Remingtons and Fiocchi doesn't make them for 10 gauge. Cheddite, those all use plastic-based wads. And of course your powder charge goes in here. That's your powder charge, of course. And above the powder charge, you're going to have some sort of other wad, because you don't want to just put your load of pellets into the powder. That's not going to work. You have to have something to push the load out the barrel. So, back in the day, we used to have fiber wads. Which you see here. And they would just sit right on top of the powder. Like so. And then your pellets would go on top of that. And it would either be roll crimped or fold crimped. If it was fold crimped, then it would just be crimped and that'd be it. If it was roll crimped, there would be an overshot card, which is this guy right here. Okay, so let's take that. that out here now. Fiber wads mostly nowadays have a different purpose. What they do nowadays usually is that we use them as a spacer wad. Say we want to make this is a 10 gauge shot cup. It's doesn't have any petals yet. Anyway, you put a spacer wad in here. Say you want to make a light fast load. You do not need the whole area. So you put a spacer wad, usually of felt or fiber, in here, however high you needed to. And then the shot would go on top of that. Now the first shot cups, plastic shot cups, look like this. They'd have a base on them, and then some kind of a thing to create a spring action, and then you have your pedals. And this was important with lead shot, particularly because lead shot, the combustion process and the sudden push on the lead could crush the pellets. It could actually deform the shape, which would affect the trajectory when they went out the barrel. I mean, the choke already squeezes them, but you don't want them to be all misshapen before they even get to the choke. And so that's what this area is for. Creates a cushion. Now, when steel shot came out, you didn't need that anymore. Because the steel shot is not malleable. It holds its shape. So, you had this. And of course, steel is, I forgot the percentage, it's like 70% dense as lead or something. Anyway, it's a lot less denser than lead. So because of that, for the same weight, you can put a lot more pellets in, which is what they did. If you had a load this big of lead, it would be really heavy. So, and tungsten the same way. So what they do on these courses use the spacers for lighter loads, and for heavier loads like turkey loads, they won't use a spacer at all. Now this 10 gauge wad will hold usually about 1 5/8 ounce of regular steel, which is actually soft iron, but we call it steel shot. About 1 5/8 ounce, which 1 5/8 ounce of lead would have been much smaller, of course. And back in the day when we used lead on waterfowl, for a 12 gauge load, 1 7/8 ounce was usually the largest, heaviest load. Since then they've come out with some 2 ounce turkey loads and even 2 1/8, I think, for 12 gauge. For 10 gauge, the most common load that was for sale on the shelves with lead was 2 ounce, 2 shot. And that was adequate to kill geese at the time. But when we went to steel, they went as high as, 1 5/8, 1 3/4 ounce, and so on. Some of the lead steel loads some of the lead waterfowl loads for 10 gauge went as high as 2 3/8 ounce, I think. And some hand loaders have made 2.5 ounce loads. But we don't use lead for waterfowl anymore, so the steel loads, I have made some 2 ounce steel loads, but I had to cut part of the shot cup off to give me more space, which of course jeopardized my barrel because steel is hard like the barrel and it can scratch it. So it's not a good thing for your gun. but it was a good experiment and it did pay off. So anyway, now generally for steel we don't use this type of wad for most loads, most magnum loads, most heavy steel loads. The heavy steel loads use a slow burning powder, and so you don't want a bunch of cushion because it's going to be, slow burning powder is going to burn slow anyway, so you don't have to worry about that. Where you're going to use this for steel shot is generally, if you're using steel, you use a cold weather load, which would be a faster burning powder, which was great for lead, but with steel you could get away with the cushion. In fact, you needed the cushion because with the faster burning powder, it would generate a spike in the pressure too fast, and you could actually jeopardize the integrity of the shotgun hull, which happened to me before. Actually had the base wad blow out the back using a Liant unique powder, too much of it, with a steel load, and it actually split the brass, and the base wad came flying out the back into my face and inside the gun. Not a good thing. Had to have the gun repaired since then. But anyway, so your load's in there, and then on top of that, you're going to have overshot wad. Now for fold crimp factory loads, they don't usually use this, but I use this on every load. And whether it's roll crimped or fold crimped. The neat thing about roll crimping is you can write on here what it is, you know. And they have clear ones of these that you can buy so you can actually see what shot you have in there. Now, sometimes you want a little better gas seal, so you'll put in this, a gas seal wad, and that will, it's usually a little bit slightly larger, and that'll help produce a better seal. It's particularly good in guns that are backboard or overboard, where the board a little bit bigger. It works great for target loads, but for waterfowl loads it's not always a good thing. So you'd have your gas seal and then your wad on top of it. In this case, with this wad, you'd have to cut some of the top off in order for it to fit properly in the shell. Now this right here, this is a 20 gauge steel shot wad. I've got something else here too. This is a wad insert. It's called a spreader insert, and what this does is blocks the center and puts more pellets out to the side from the center, so it actually helps spread your load out. But when you reload your shells, you definitely want to make sure that your load is going to come out. If you're going to fold crimp, you want to be probably about damn near almost half an inch down from the end of the shell. Because if you're too close to the top, your fold is not going to go down far enough, and you're going to have a compromised crimp. And you can have what they call a blooper. Well, I call them a dud. You'll go to shoot, and you'll hear it, it'll go pop, and you'll see the pellets go out the barrel. Hopefully the wad goes out, because you really shouldn't fire a load behind it if the wad is stuck in the barrel. You should clear the barrel first. But when combustion takes place with a shot cup, the powder cup right here, expands. expands against the barrel to help seal it. And that provides a much better seal than the old fiber wads could have ever done, thereby giving you better velocity. Now, this one is not split. As you can see, I buy these like this so I can split them myself. Why? Because another way to alter your pattern a little bit with the wads is to change the number of petals. Usually if you want a wider spread, you go with more petals, say 6, maybe even 8. You can go down as low as 2, but I settle on 3 for a tight pattern. What that does is it'll hold together a little longer. Because as it comes out of the barrel, the air catches it and the little petals open up, and then the wad, it gets drag because it has air drag on it, and the shot keeps going. And so you separate your wad from the shot without any disruption. Something I need to point out, here's another type of wad too. This is shotcut, but it's a limited bore contact. It's goes through the bore a little easier, supposedly. Now, one thing I need to point out is with your wad, see this one's, it's got petals, but they're together. Kind of like a parts tree for a plastic model. It's got a little attachment here and there. You want to open these up before you load the shell. I mean, you might think, well, you just put it in there, and the combustion will force it out, and all that pressure in there will cause them to open. That's not always true. I actually have found spent wads that did not open up properly. I even found a couple of manufactured ones that way. So you want to make sure it's going to be able to open up properly, because if it does not open up properly, what happens is the wad can go along with the shot, and it's shooting out like a slug, and then it can end up rolling, and some of the shot can come out, but a bunch of it can stay in here. So then you got a few scattered pellets and one big lump of the rest of the pellets, which leads to an absolutely horrible pattern. And you usually won't get anything that way. Not going to knock anything down, generally speaking. Now, something else I want to cover. I buy this stuff from Ballistic Products called Wad Slick. And what you do, as I open up the wad package, you see this was in the flood. Take a little bit of this stuff. It's a dry lubricant. It does not affect the burn of powder or anything. So it has no negative effect. You just put it in there, and then you shake it around. Shake and bake. And what you get is, how I see this, get it in the light more where you can see it better. This dry lubricant sticks to the wad and it becomes slick. Goes through the barrel easier, so you don't get as much reduction in velocity. You can see some of it on my hand there. It's great stuff. I use it, and it lasts a long time. I think it cost, when I bought it, it cost like $8 for that container. I've had it for years. Alright, hopefully you can see me. I'm going to make one shell for the video. This is a Fiochi hull. I'm going to make, oh yeah, we can talk about that here. Tungsten. Tungsten, a lot of the tungsten rods you can use these because it behaves more like lead than steel. This is a 1253 wad. TT 1253. Yeah. Need 38 grains. And I already have my scale set up. 38 grains of Hodgson long shot. And it is a slow burning powder, so it won't work as good in cold weather, but I killed some geese the other day with some, so I'll weed this out. Oh, there's something under the scale. Maybe it was, why it wouldn't be wrong. That's the problem with having a messy workshop. Not stuffing away. Okay. Come on. Still too much. Still too much. Okay. Just a hair too much. Okay, that's close enough. Now, I'm going to put that in here. This is a primered hull, so it means it's a primed hull. It already has primer in it. Right. And we're going to put a 1253 wad in there. Push it down. Now, you can see the distance here. And this type of wad will also push down slightly too, so it'll help preserve blood pressure. Now if I was to load that, here's my number 7 heavyweight. If I was to load that, it's going to be a 28 gram load for 1 ounce. Okay. $28 grams is not very much of this. So I don't have a fiber wad in here. You can see how far down it is. So yeah, I'm in my pajamas, so what? I like to be casual when I'm doing this. Okay, so I'm going to put in 20 gauge fiber wad inside 12 gauge shell. I'll try one. And also do it this way. Use the load all. see where that comes out. There it is. See that right there? That's just about right. You really shouldn't go over the top of the shot cup if you can help it, because in doing so, pellets can get in between the wad and the barrel and scratch it. And then we put a over the shot collar on it. And we're going to fold crimp this one. So, I should have done the 6 segment one, that's in that. The 8 segment will also work. And head is a good crimp. That load's ready to go. Nothing to it. It is important to weigh every load. Every load. Because if you don't, you'll get inconsistent loads. Had to change batteries in the camera. As far as me wearing my pajamas doing video, think of it like the dude in The Big Lebowski. I like to have a relaxed atmosphere. Now for doing a roll crimp, well, I'm going to include a roll crimp segment on this video. Okay, now we're going to do a roll crimp. The recipe that I'm using actually calls for a fold crimp, but I'm going to use a roll crimp instead. A roll crimp, generally with a roll crimp you'll have a little bit less velocity, a little bit less pressure, but I have yet to have a dud from a roll crimp shell. Roll crimps are superior to fold crimps, but they're not as cost effective. That's why most companies use fold crimp instead. Anyway, what we're using here is, oh no, this is a mess. I've got, my shop is still a disaster area, as always. 10 gauge shell, and I'm going to put some ITX shot in it. This table's a disaster area, of course. When it comes to keeping the area clear, do as I say, not as I do. Should be 39 grams. Now that's 40. 1 3/8 ounce, okay. Like that. And it's going to be almost to the top. The advantage to a roll crimp shell is that you can get more material in the shell casing. You can get away with it. Now I'm going to use a overshot wad. So. And I'm going to put it in the press and introduce about 50, well, it doesn't call for this, but I always think it's a good idea to put some pressure on there so that you have wad pressure for sure. Now, I have to have both hands free, so hopefully you can see this all right. It doesn't require a lot of speed. I don't use a lot of speed on here. Slowly go down and you feel it make contact. Just put light pressure on it. And you'll feel it start to go downward. And then it just kind of stops. And we have a roll crimp shell. There's oil on there because I put a little bit of oil in there to lubricate it. And that's all there is to it. Roll crimp is pretty easy. You can also use a hand drill. Of course you have to hold the shell. You can buy a vise to put the shell in. At the time that I was going to order one, they were out of them. But they don't lose wad pressure. They're a lot better about not losing wad pressure than a fold crimp, at least in my experience. Anyway, that's all there is to roll crimping. Now, as far as it goes with the number of petals to put in the wad, if you're using a pattern master type choke, something like that that stops the wad anyway, it's probably not going to matter about the petals because it's a wad stopper choke anyhow, so it separates the wad from the pellets before it would even matter about the number of petals. So it's kind of immaterial. I would still make sure it's got petals though. I wouldn't leave it unsliced. I don't think that would be a good idea. I want to also mention that when you use a spacer wad, like a fiber or felt wad, use a gauge smaller than what the shell is. In other words, usually with a 12 gauge, you would use a 20 gauge wad. With a 10 gauge, you'd use a 12 or a 20. Or, in my mind, I think a 16 would probably be about perfect because you can use a 12, but it feels awfully tight. And at the bottom of the wad tapers because, like on the 10 gauge wad, it's not exactly, the very bottom of it's a little bit narrower. So I use 20s in there, even though it'll say to use 12. That's something to keep in mind. A 20 gauge shell, you use a 28 gauge wad, and so on. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I want to especially thank my patrons who actually contribute money to these efforts and help make this possible. Appreciate you guys and the ones who've stuck with me through the years. Thank you.